It's wonderful.
Without further ado, Cathie Harms is a one-woman encyclopedia of knowledge about interior Alaska wildlife. After spending 3.5 decades as a wildlife biologist for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. In addition to her work as a biologist, Cathie's helped manage the Creamersfield Migratory Waterfowl Refuge and the Fairbanks Hunter Education indoor shooting range. She also designed the highly popular Becoming an Outdoors Woman workshop series, which helped hundreds of Alaska women develop fishing, hunting, survival, and general outdoor skills that are invaluable to an active lifestyle here in the interior. Her career at Fish and Game made her an authority in the intersection between humans and wild animals in Alaska, from bear attacks to wolves with rabies and everything in between. Harms' interests are as varied as her job responsibilities. For 4 decades, she's been part of the PAWS canine search and rescue group that helps find lost hikers and others in need of assistance in the backcountry. She also volunteers for other groups. We'll hear some more about that. But let's get started, I guess, with your early life.
Okay,
Cathie.
disclaimer first,
Yes,
Tom.
okay.
Okay, I didn't design the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. It came from Wisconsin. I was the first coordinator up here, and we kind of customized it to Alaska, but I can't take credit for starting it. So, but it's a great program.
As you mentioned in a conversation we had earlier last week, you didn't grow up here in Alaska, but you did grow up in a small town. And how did that affect your upbringing and the things that you value, I guess?
Well, it was kind of funny because my dad was from Peoria, Illinois, and my mother was from New York City. So I had a relatively small town person and a big city person, and I grew up in a town of about 1,500 people, which was harder on my mother than you would imagine. But it worked out fine, and that was normal to me, and I've never been a big city person. So what I tell people when I describe Alaska, I say Alaska is the world's smallest huge city. Anchorage is. Anchorage is a very small, huge city. And Fairbanks is the world's largest small town. And it just has always felt like a small town to me. So it just makes me comfortable.
I think that rings true with a lot of us who live here. And obviously you have liked Alaska well enough to spend the majority of your life at this point here.
Well, yeah, I didn't plan that, but
yeah, I understand that when you, like before you came here, you weren't convinced about coming to Alaska. And
I had no intention of it.
Tried to dissuade a friend who wanted to move north. Tell us a little bit about that.
There were 3 of us from a small high school. Our high school had 300 people, and we were all in the same class, and we were best buds, and we still are best buds. And we decided that we came from Illinois, which has the topography of a pancake where we live, and we wanted to go to Montana, because Montana had mountains. And it was the Wild West. It was incredible. I was so excited about it. And so all 3 of us agreed to move to Montana. And one gal got a teaching certificate, a teaching degree from English, and I got a degree in zoology, wildlife, and the other one became a pharmacist who was much more employable than the other 2 of us. And she gets a job offer to Wrangell. And she tells me, I got a job offer in Wrangell, Alaska. And I said, tell him no. And she said, why? And I said, because I don't want to live in that frozen, barren wasteland. And so, knowing nothing about Wrangell, I talked her out of it. And then I took a summer job out of state for the National Wildlife Federation at a camp on the North Carolina. And I got a letter saying, I got another job offer, and I've accepted it, and it's in Kotzebue. And I kind of think if you look up the term frozen, barren wasteland, and you look at the topography around Kotzebue, it kind of fits better than Wrangell. But anyway, so she went to Kotzebue, the English teacher got a job in Illinois, and I went to Montana. Heck with it, I wanted to go there, so I worked at a ski area for a year. And then the English teacher went up to Kotzebue and got a job teaching right away. And they wrote me letters, and I said, well, how long are you going to be there? They said, we don't know, why? And I said, well, if you're going to be there 1 year, I'll come visit. But if you're going to be there 2 years, I'll come next year. I really like Montana. It's really wonderful. Oh, we don't think we're going to be here that long, Kath. So I bought a one-way ticket to Kotzebue, and And it was an incredible experience. The people were amazing, the wildlife and everything about it was incredible. But the bottom line is, 3.5 years later, I was the first one to leave. And I moved. It's the kind of town that if you show up, you can have almost any job. Any job. So I worked in the hospital as a medical records clerk. I was a substitute teacher. I was a janitor. I drove the school bus. I worked for 9 months for Fish and Game and 11 months for Fish and Wildlife Service. And at the end of my time in Kotzebue, the only job offer I had on the table was at the Dairy Queen. And that was my first job in high school. And I thought, I don't think I want to go back to Dairy Queen. So I moved to Fairbanks so I could go back to school and pay in-state tuition. And I didn't want to live in Anchorage because it was a big town, so I moved to Fairbanks. And it was just a couple of semesters and I'm out of here. And that didn't happen.
Well, we're grateful for it. As you mentioned, you know your first experience in Alaska was in Kotzebue. How did village life affect you, and how did it shape your view of kind of what Alaska is?
Well, first of all, it's a small town, but it's a village, not a town. And like I said, the people were incredible, and the experiences I had were amazing, and it was wonderful. But it was a cultural experience too, because I think it's not a bad thing for people to experience as a Caucasian to be a minority group member. And that really is an important experience in my life, and I learned tremendously about it. But when I was done in Kotzebue, I was done in Alaska. I mean, the only reason I came to Fairbanks is because I couldn't afford out-of-state tuition. And I figure there are like 5 states of Alaska. You know, there's the interior, there's Northwest, there's Southwest, there's South Central, and there's Southeast. And I thought I was done with Alaska, but I think what happened is I was done with Northwest. And I got to the interior, whole different world. Whole different world, different plants, different animals, different people, different opportunities, and so, and then, you know, I take classes at the university, and I took some graduate level biology classes, wildlife biology classes, and I took some journalism and broadcasting classes. And in the first class I took, which was television production, there was this guy, and we have been together ever since.
To be clear, you are talking about Dirk, your husband, right?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, and him, yeah. No, yeah, we were the non-traditional students in a television production class. And we both handled being in very stressful situations differently. I start chatting and talking and being involved with people, and he shrinks to the wall. And it was amazing that we got together, but as the oldest 2 people in the class, I knew he was probably the kind of person I enjoyed because he passed me a note in a lecture. I mean, we're 27 years old and he passes me a note. And the note said, "How big is your boyfriend?" I was like, okay, I'm in. So yeah, we've been together since we were married in '81 and have 2 wonderful sons. And I think Fairbanks was a great place to raise the boys. And we've, well, keep in mind, I will always be a newcomer because he was born here. So I'm the rookie, but it's been a great place.
You've always had an interest in animals, but you told me when we were talking last week that you initially were looking at becoming a veterinarian. How did the shift from pets to wild animals take place?
Well, I was very interested in being a vet. But, you know, there was a TV show growing up, and it was called Daktari. I don't know if you ever remember Daktari. He was a veterinarian in Africa, and he was taking care of rhinos and elephants, and that's my view of a veterinarian. I mean, that seemed cool. So I thought that was great, and then I get to college, and I'm working towards it. And, you know, there were 2 choices. There were pets, or there was livestock. And cows weren't as interesting as rhinos, and I didn't want to deal with poodles. And And the bottom line is, the truth of it was, I didn't have the grades for vet school, but it was also at a time that out of 40 veterinarian students accepted at the University of Illinois, 4 were women. And that's just the way it had always been. And when my advisor told me he wouldn't give me a recommendation, I said, why? And he said, because we will spend 5 years training you, and you will practice for 2 years, and you'll get married and have kids, and we'll waste our time. And it was like, oh, well, you know, I would have fought like crazy if I had all A's, and I didn't. So I changed to zoology because I really was more interested in wildlife, and as it turned out, it was a better fit.
You got to Fairbanks in 1980, which was, you know, just after the pipeline, but it was after the pipeline. How different of a place was it then from how it is now?
Well, first of all, you got to remember it was really different from Kotzebue. There wasn't a lot of pipeline influence in Kotz, but it was a huge town. But while I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service in Kotzebue, I had 3 separate details to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is much more different from Kotzebue than Fairbanks. So coming to Fairbanks, it was the big hubbub of the pipeline had kind of died down, but on one of our dates, we're driving downtown and all of the bars let out, and we watched a mini riot on 2nd Avenue. And I sat there for about 30 seconds thinking, this is an interesting town. And I don't think I want to be on the streets at midnight. But it was a little bit more of frontier and so forth. And everybody had a pipeline story. Everybody. I kind of felt sorry for missing out on some of that because some of the stories are incredible. But I feel like some of those stories are mine now because I know them well. But yeah.
What has kept you here since 1980?
Well, it's kind of like going to Kotzebue. I keep buying one-way tickets. No, it's a great community. When you live in a town and you can't go to the grocery store without seeing 3 to 6 people you know well enough to have a chat with, or you can, it's just the very small town atmosphere, and it's very difficult to go places in Fairbanks without seeing your friends and people you know. And I suppose you could, but it hasn't been my experience. And you can get involved in darn near anything you want to, anything, and volunteers are always welcome. And volunteering has been a big part of my life, and I think it was because one of my first bosses was Bud Burris. Bud Burris was an incredible guy. Now, talk about royalty of Fish and Game. Dick Bishop and Bud Burris hired me, and I would kill for either of those two. I think they were wonderful, wonderful people. But Bud walked into my office one day, and I'd been working there probably about 10 months or something. And he said, so, where do you volunteer in town? Well, I guess I don't yet. And he looked at me and he said, well, you're going to have to change that. I said, okay. And he said, think about it, but you really should get involved. And I thought, well, you know, I'm a product of Girl Scouts, so I'll go be a Girl Scout leader. And so I was a Girl Scout leader for a couple of years. And by then, Dirk and I got married 2 weeks before I started my job. And it's kind of funny because I said, I got it. I got a job at Fish and Game. And he said, what are you going to be doing? And I said, well, I'm hired as a biologist, but I'm going to get to tell people about what Fish and Game is doing and get information from the public to Fish and Game. And it's great. It's called the Information Education Biologist. And Dirk sat for a second and he said, are you the one that's going to tell my friends who've hunted in some area for 20 years that they can't? And I said, well, if the season closes, possibly, yeah. And he thought again, and he said, are you the one that's going to talk about wolf control? And I said, probably. And he said, would you do me a favor? And I said, sure. And he said, don't use my name. So Harms is my maiden name, But I worked under Harms, but I was toured off after work. And I had credit cards under Harms and credit cards under Tordoff, and I had both names on my driver's license and both names on my checking account, but my Social Security card was under Harms because that's what I worked under, and everything was fine, but nowadays TSA thinks I'm a terrorist. So after I retired, I said to Dirk, I said, I don't work for him anymore. What's my name? And so I went to the driver's license station, and first of all, it was Catherine Marie Harms, Tordoff, that they didn't have a hyphen or a space. So I was actually Catherine Marie Harmsterdoff. And so then they got the ability to put in a hyphen, which I've never used. And then I said, you know, it'd be so much simpler if I just got rid of Marie. Everybody knows me by Harms. I could be Catherine Harms Tordoff. And they said, okay. And I said, can you get rid of the Marie on my driver's license? And they said, sure. And I said, great, that'll be the first step. And they said, show me your change of name decree from the court. So I had to go to court and change my name. So my real name, even though it said Cathie Harms, I'm actually Cathie Harms Tordoff. So Cathie Harms is like Mary Beth or Mary Ann or something like that. That's my first and middle name now. So, but I could be like Cher and only have one name, so that'd be good. So anyway, where were we going on this? What? We've done it.
We got where we need.
Yeah, it's a small town, it's fun. Volunteering is incredible, and there are two other volunteer groups that I really do want to mention that I've been involved with for a really long time. One is the Midnight Sun Council of Scouting, because ever since my kids were in Cubs and both of my sons achieved the rank of Eagle, we've been involved in scouting, and I serve on the board of the Midnight Sun Council now. And the other is the Outdoor Heritage Foundation of Alaska, which is an organization that is, it's now a nonprofit. When it got started, it was a joint bank account between Fish and Game and, was it the Outdoor Council or TVSA? I think it was TVSA, Outdoor Council. Anyway, they put money in a pot to spend on outdoor education. And since then, it's evolved into a genuine 501c3, and it was the reason we could do the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, because it was an expensive program, and people were willing to pay tuition, but if they wrote a check to the state of Alaska, it would go to the general fund. But if they wrote it to the Outdoor Heritage Foundation or the Hunter Heritage Foundation, which is where it started, it was in a bank account I could spend money out of. So I used it as a money laundering place for a while. Now it's a real organization, and it really helps with outdoor education within the department and outside the department. So those are two big organizations that I'm still involved with.
Great. We're going to return to that, I promise, in some questions later on. I'm not
good at following orders.
Oh, it's all good. When you first got on board at Fish and Game as an information education biologist, that job title sounds pretty similar to what you were doing basically right up until you retired from Fish and Game. Did your role change much in that time, or were you doing kind of the same thing just in different decades?
There were some changes. Originally, it was information education biologist, and then for a while, there was a guy in Anchorage that had a job very, very similar to mine, and Bruce was hired as an information officer, and it was kind of the people in Fairbanks hired a biologist and taught them how to say things, but the people in Anchorage hired a reporter and taught them what to say. And Bruce and I worked together really well on everything. And one day my boss was talking to him, and he said, well, what's Bruce hired as? And I said, he's an information officer. And he said, well, do you want to be an information officer? And I said, no, not really. And he said, well, look into it and talk to me. So I looked into it, and I found out Bruce was being paid more than me. And I said, yeah, I want to be an information officer. So for a couple of years there, I was an information officer, and then my boss was David James, incredible guy to work with, and he did some reorganization, and he came to me and asked if I would be willing to manage two significant programs that weren't only focused on wildlife. They had a great deal of public interaction, and that was Creamer's Refuge and the Hunter Education Indoor Shooting Range. And I said I would be delighted to work with those programs, and he said, well, there's a problem. And I said, what's that? And he said, you're going to have to be a biologist again. And I said, can I be the next level up? And he said, sure. So that's how I got back into the biologist series. But no matter what, the media aspect of my job, of talking with the media, pretty much stayed constant, mostly because if you're the kind of person that wants to go to college and be a wildlife biologist, you don't want to talk to reporters. You just don't. I mean, they do it to go sit on a mountain and look at animals, not to talk to reporters. And it didn't bother me. So I stayed as the media contact just because it was easier than trying to get some of the real biologists to do that. I mean, I've had reporters beg me not to bring some of those biologists back to them because they would just freeze in front of a camera. And so anyway, I kept the media duties. I took on Creamer's and the shooting range, and I was still becoming an outdoors woman with other coordinators right in Fairbanks. Incredible people to work with, very, very, very talented. One of the reasons I stayed, I could have retired early. I mean, once upon a time, I'll make this quick, once upon a time, well, to this day, there have been more wildlife biologists in the Department of Fish and Game killed in the line of duty than state troopers. And it's because the job can be very dangerous. You're flying around in a real small plane, you're in a small boat somewhere. And so there still have been more. And if you've got a so-called dangerous job, there's two ways to reward that person. One is with a lot of money, and the other is an early retirement. So at the time I was hired, biologists were offered 20-year retirement because of that concern about safety and so forth. And I was one of the last people to come in under 20-year retirement. Was my job personally that dangerous? Well, not all the time. There's always field trips or field assignments that could go wrong, but it wasn't day by day by day. But I had 20-year retirement, and I had my paperwork filled out, and I was ready to go when I hit 20 years. I was ready to go. And my boss and I at the time had challenges in communication, and butted heads a little bit. And so I'm thinking, I got 2 weeks and I'm out of here. And 1 week after that, he retired. And it was like, And I went into the guy that got the job, and I talked to him, and I said, I'd really like the chance to work with you. And it was another 15 years of the greatest chance to work with the smartest people I'd ever met. It was great. So as far as money management goes, you're supposed to hit retirement, take it, get another job, hit retirement, and I'm not very smart that way. But I had a great time, and the people I work with were amazing. And I didn't really want to leave, except that Dirk told me he was going to retire, and I said, I'll give you 2 years before I get jealous. That lasted almost a week and a half. And, but I did make it almost 2 years after he retired, and even though I loved the people and I loved the work, we just wanted to do other things. And so, so anyway, yeah, I spent 35 years when I had 20-year retirement, but oh well.
Well, I didn't write this question down, but it just kind of came to me while you were talking about, your job at Fish and Game. At its worst, and I say this as a hunter myself, kind of hunting and fishing culture can be a sort of a boys' club. Did you have to navigate that as, a prominent woman within Fish and Game locally, or, was it a more egalitarian, sensibility?
Oh, no. I'm looking at 2 other female biologists who were at Fish and Game, and it was not everybody's equal. It was, we have some real pioneers here in the audience. I mean, when I got hired, there was Cathie Frost and Diane Preston and Jean Ernest and Dot Simpson, and those were the only biologists, female, in the interior. And then I was the 5th. Nowadays, it's almost 50-50. But Robin is in the audience here. Robin was the first area biologist who was a female. Now about half of them are. It was a different world, and my theory on it. And Margot, who was here, she was both a habitat biologist and a planner for the state. My theory was, you know, you're outnumbered, get your job done, and keep a sense of humor, and it works. Were all the opportunities offered to everybody? No, there were some. You know, I probably applied for 8 other jobs within Fish and Game, and I didn't get any of them. And but in the long run, that worked out for me because I ended up in the exact spot I wanted to be. So it was a boys' club, but they were great guys. Yeah, I got along with them. They were smart. They were wonderful, and I think it was interesting being on that edge of when more women were getting into that field. And like I said, now you walk into the office and it's got to be close to 50-50. It's got to be close to even. And that's cool.
Well, you answered that question honestly and I think also charitably, so good work. When people think about Fish and Game, I feel like there's a tendency for people to concentrate on the most political aspects of the work, like predator control or decisions that are made by the boards of game and fish. Was that focus difficult to deal with as somebody who was in charge of communicating policy to people, or were there enough other more fun topics to make it worth it?
Oh, there were lots of fun topics. There were wonderful things, you know, like the geese coming back to creamers every year, and the every year we talk to people about don't pick up the baby animals and stuff like that. And I shouldn't tell this story, but I'm going to anyway.
The right answer.
John Wright was a wildlife biologist, and he comes to me and he said, Cathie, I've got a classroom of 4th graders. They're coming here. We're going to break them into 2 pieces. Will you take the second group? I'm going to take them around the nature trail first. You're going to do this activity, then we'll switch. I said, okay, sure. So I'm going to go around the nature trail with this 4th grade group, and we're going second. We're not going to see any animals. The first group's going to scare them away. There's nothing to see out there. So I do this big build-up class to the kids. We have to look for clues for the animals. We have to listen to the birds. We have to listen to the squirrels. We have to look for pieces of fur on the ground and feathers. We have to look for places the animals have eaten. We have to look for all the clues. And so we're all excited to be detectives and go out and look for wildlife. So we're walking through the field to get to the nature trail, and I had eaten Mexican food for lunch. But we're outside, and I figured there's no problem if I've got a little bit of gas, you know. We're outside, it's not a problem. So I did, and this little girl comes running up to me, and she goes, oh, I think I smell a moose. And I told that story to Bob Stevenson, who is our wolf biologist and everything, and years later he was writing a script for a video, an educational video of why hunters should not kill cow moose in a low population, and it was a great script. And for a working title, he put on it, I think I smell a moose. So I go to the first meeting with the Fish and Wildlife Service biologists and the Fish and Game biologists to talk this over, and I said, well, we got to clear the air here. I have to explain to you why this working title is there. And I start to tell him this story, and I get halfway through it, and one of the biologists from the Fish and Wildlife Service says, oh, we all know that story. My reputation was different, but yeah, there always were, I probably got more phone calls from people either in tears or furious because Alaska was trying to eliminate wolves from the face of the earth, and they were genuinely concerned and genuinely upset, and they hated me. And probably 90% of them that I talked to, I'd spend 15, 20 minutes on the phone with them and explain the whole situation, and the vast majority of them would say, I still don't like what you're doing, but that's a tough job, and I understand why you're doing it now, but I don't like it. And I said, well, that's fair. And I said, I can tell you right now that I work with people that agree with you. But I also work for people that don't agree with you, and we have to manage different ways in different parts of the state for those things. And the vast majority of people were just, if I had heard what they had heard before they called me, I would have been furious. And so not the whole story got out. And so for the one-on-one discussions, most of them were great. There was the guy that wished that me and my family suffered every bit as much as every animal that we killed up here. And it was right before the holiday season, and I asked if he wanted more information, and he said, I wouldn't take it from someone like you. And I said, well, I'd be glad to talk to you if you have any questions. I don't have any questions. I know what you're doing, and I hope you hurt and your family hurts. And so I said the only thing I could think of at that point, I said, well, sir, Merry Christmas. And I couldn't share anything else at that point. So, but yeah, there were a lot of controversies, but most controversies get worse if people don't know. I don't know how much time we got. I got one more cool story.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay. We had a calf mortality study going out in the Galena area. And in a calf mortality study, the cow moose are radio collared, and then they're checked to make sure they're pregnant. And then in the spring, biologists go out, find the cow. As soon as she has calves, the helicopter frightens the cow slightly away while the biologist gets on the ground, grabs the calf, puts a elastic radio collar on its neck, gets back in the helicopter and flies away in a short enough period of time that the cow will come back and not abandon her calf. And that way the calf's got a collar on and it's got a mortality signal if it doesn't move. So if the calf dies, then the biologist can go out and determine what killed this calf. And it's a big, important study to figure out what calf survival is and what's affecting calf survival. And we had a program going out in Galena, and the helicopter pilot's job is to make sure the calf doesn't get to the biologist because the calf wants to kill him. And so he's trying to haze her away, and he's got a shotgun, and the biologist's got a shotgun, and both of them are loaded with either cracker shells that blow up like firecrackers or bean bags that'll sting them and make them run a little bit but won't hurt them. And anyway, one of those cracker shells got deployed, and the grass caught fire. And the wind blew it, and it got to a spruce tree, and poof, the spruce tree is up. And the wind was out, and it was dark, and it started a significant wildland fire. It was big. And the city of Galena almost burned down. And so anyway, one day I'm sitting in my office, and I get this phone call from a reporter in Anchorage. And he says, I understand that Fish and Game may have been involved in starting the Galena fire. And I took a deep breath, and I thought, I could go two ways here. I could say, well, we don't have information, or I could say, and I just took a deep breath and I said, yeah, we sure were. Would you like to hear about it? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, okay. So I told him about the calf mortality study and what we were trying to learn. And I told him that to save the biologist's life, sometimes we have to scare the cow moose away so she doesn't kill him, and what cracker shells were and when we used them and how the cracker shell took off. And he said, well, do you do these calf mortality studies anywhere else? And I said, oh, yeah, we've done one near Toke, we've done them here, we've done them in Galena, we've done them in different places. And he says, and these cracker shells, how often are those used? And I said, well, we use them whenever we need to scare an animal to keep the person safe or to keep the animal safe or whatever. And I talked to him for probably 45 minutes. And he says, you know, I don't think there's a story here. And he never wrote it. And I thought, that could have been a real cover-up. You know, it could have been great. But I'd still feel that if communication is good enough, the amount of controversy goes way down. And I got a job to be able to do a lot of that communication, so it was fun.
One highlight of your kind of late career was the reintroduction of wood bison to the wild here in Alaska. What was it like to finally execute a program that had spent so long being planned and reviewed and rescoped?
You know, I got in on the tail end of that, and it's an amazing program. You know, Margot's in the audience. She was a big part of it. For anybody in wildlife biology, the chance to reestablish a species that is extinct in this area, I mean, that's the highlight of a career. That's incredible. And the whole concept came from Bob Stevenson, who was our wolf biologist for a long time, and then he was a lynx biologist, and then he was the Fort Yukon area biologist. And they don't have a lot of moose near Fort Yukon. Their meat supplies are low, and then the salmon stocks started going down. And Bob's going along the Yukon one day, and he stops over on the ground, and he and a couple of the other biologists are walking around, and he goes, "That's Calamagrostis," which is a forb. It's a plant that grows. And he says, "That's what bison eat. Wonder why there aren't bison around here." And that simple question started him researching. And not only did he find out the history of the fact that, yeah, bison have been all over in Alaska, he was able to locate people in the villages with oral histories that remembered bison in Alaska. And then he started sending in samples of bones that miners had given him and stuff, and he got them carbon dated. And the most recent bison in Alaska were here within 200 years. It's not like they've been gone for a million years. They were here, they still had stories in the villages about hunting them and how to take care of the hides and what they did with them. And so Bob was this incredibly jack of all trades guy. So somebody had imported wood bison to Delta to have a bison herd. Well, they weren't legal to import because they were on the endangered list or something. So the Fish and Wildlife Service confiscated them. And they called up Bob and they said, "We got some wood bison. What should we do with them?" And Bob says, "I'll take them." And he makes an arrangement with the Wildlife Conservation Center in Girdwood, and he gets this herd down there. And then he makes contacts. He gets a seat on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Wood Bison Restoration Group and so forth. And anyway, I give tremendous amount of credit to Bob. And then there was David James, who was the regional supervisor up here, who kept the program alive when the people in Juneau didn't want it anymore. We heard rumors that people in Juneau said, "Just have a barbecue, get rid of those animals," because it was 20-some years that we had captive bison, but we weren't allowed to release them. And first it was concerns about disease, and then they tested for disease, and then they tested them again for disease. It's the most tested group of bison on the planet that were clean, but we never got permission to take them out, and then they were on the endangered species list. We did a big study to find out where could bison live today in Alaska. The best piece of habitat in the world is Yukon Flats. Second best in Alaska was Minto Flats. It wasn't anywhere near as big as Yukon, couldn't hold as many bison, but the weather was better. And the third was Anoka Flats. And Anoka had all the plants they needed, but the weather was pretty sketchy in the winter. They got a lot of ice and snow and so forth. And we did an awful lot of working with the public. We had native groups in support. We had conservation groups. We had hunting groups. We had urban hunters, native hunters. We had most of the people, a lot of the people in Fish and Wildlife Service. And we had pretty much 2 individuals in the state who didn't want it. They didn't want the bison back. One happened to be the refuge manager of Yukon Flats. And his bosses liked the idea, his underlings liked the idea, but they said, "You're going to have to convince him," and he wasn't convinced. And then the other was a lawyer for Doyon, and Doyon still does not support bison reintroduction, and they have the concern that if they want to do mineral extraction, having an endangered species complicates that. So we went through a 2-year process to get a special rule written and adopted or printed in the Federal Register that prevents wood bison from being considered endangered, basically. Yes, they're on the list, but they don't have to be treated like wood bison or like endangered species. You can have development around them. You can hunt them if needed. You can get rid of them if it interferes with development. And basically, it eliminates the problems that having an endangered species can provide to industry. Well, it did not. It prevented anybody from suing Doyon for development from winning a suit against Doyon for development. It did not prevent people from suing Doyon. So they still can't support that. But they were not supportive in Yukon Flats or in Minto, but they were willing to let it happen in Anoka. And the last year I worked was 2015, and that's when the bison were released in Anoka. And it was an amazing thing because, okay, great, we're going to release 100 bison. Super, we're going to put them 300 miles over here. Aren't any roads. So we're going to fly them in on hercs. 7 of them in a connex, 2 connexes per herc, 3 flights, 7 adults, 15 or 20 calves. And Tom Seaton is the biologist who planned and did all of this. It was a ballet of getting, because down at the conservation center, they're putting the bison through chutes to a squeeze chute to give them vitamins, put a radio collar on them, put ear tags on them, load them into the thing. Next bison comes through, 7 in the box. Then the forklift picks up that box, puts it on a truck. And then the next bison are coming through. Soon as that truck goes, it heads for Anchorage. Meanwhile, the people in Shagaluk are on the ground waiting for them to arrive. They've already got corrals built for them and everything else. And everything that could go wrong almost did. First, the night before we're doing this, and we've got 20 different reporters coming, highest tide on record and the whole area flooded. So we had to change the schedule. And I had to call all 20 reporters and say, don't come at 10, come at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then they get them in the truck, and the first truck goes up, and DOT's shooting missiles at the hillside to get rid of avalanches. And all the cars are backed up. And we got to get to the airport in time for the herc. So we get to there, they get the herc loaded. I had flown out ahead of time at the last minute to work with the people in Shagaluk. And the plane I was landing in had a flat tire on the runway. We landed and the whole plane's shaking. So he parks over to the side. The herc comes, there's a plane on the runway. They can't land. So everybody runs out from Shagaluk on their snow machines. They put the nose wheel of this twin plane in the sled. Everybody pushes the plane off the runway. By the time the herc lands, it had something like 7 minutes of fuel left before it had to return to Anchorage. So we got them there. And you can't talk a lot around bison because it increases the stress. And if you're moving them, they're basically wild animals, and they're at a high level of stress. There's a thing called capture mortality, and they can die. And often programs have up to 10% capture mortality. And we spent that whole day, and at the end of the day, 100 animals walked out of that plane and made it to Shagaluk. And if you're interested in it, on YouTube, we documented the whole effort. Moving images, Stuart All and Maureen All videoed it and everything. And Stuart has passed away, but before, he put a 20-minute video that isn't a movie or anything. It just shows what was going on. And if you Google wood bison restoration Alaska, there's a 20-minute video on YouTube. It's worth seeing because it was an amazing experience, just incredible. And I got to talk to the reporters and try to keep them quiet and everything else. So it was really a cool project to tag in on the end. I mean, I wasn't the initial person with the idea. I wasn't the scientific side of it, but I got to help at the end, and that was really fun.
C-130 Hercules, or Herc, is a military plane. So in addition to all the other logistics, were you also coordinating with the military on flying
no,
around?
it was Lyndon.
Oh, okay. They've got some Hercs themselves. Great.
Yeah,
I was
and
gonna
they
say,
were
you had to...
fabulous people. No, it wasn't military. We've done a lot of other things with the military. We recollared grizzly bears one time, and instead of getting the small maneuverable helicopters, we couldn't afford them. But the military needed training on Hueys, And so we're out there chasing a grizzly bear in a Huey, and it was, we went back to the smaller helicopters the next year. And so we have coordinated with the military quite a bit on a lot of different projects and so forth, but and this one, it was Lyndon. Lyndon was amazing. They really, really, really worked with us on price and everything else. I mean, the fact that we could afford to do this project was amazing.
All right, I told you we'd get back to this. You have a long-time affiliation with outdoor-related organizations like the Boy Scouts, PAWS Search and Rescue, and the Becoming an Outdoors Woman education series. What's the common thread behind your choices to devote your efforts to those groups?
Alaska has a very, very, very unusual method of managing wildlife. People think Fish and Game write all the hunting regulations and all the fishing regulations, but all those decisions are made by 7 people chosen to make the wildlife regulations and 7 people chosen to do the fish regulations, the Board of Fish and the Board of Game. And those are people chosen by the governor. And to my knowledge, there's really not a job requirement for that. There are people the governor chooses to sit on these boards. The vast majority of the boards have been incredibly knowledgeable. They've had wildlife biologists, they've had guides, they've had people who've lived subsistence lifestyles in villages, they've had professors from the university, but that's not required. We've also had governors who were elected who replaced the entire boards with people who donated to them. We've had people who literally confused moose with caribou and did not know the difference. We have had that happen. And so anyway, it doesn't take long to figure out that education, if wildlife truly is valuable to Alaska, then the decisions need to be made by people who know and care. And if people don't spend time outdoors, you can be very insulated from wildlife. You can live in a city here and just have a city experience and not really know anything about the wildlife around it. So getting people outdoors is really, really important. And the more I learned about that, there's a book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. And his theory was that the increase in childhood maladies, everything from obesity to diabetes to ADHD to every possible thing that can go challenging with a child, correlated inversely with the amount of time they spent outdoors. And not outdoors playing softball or playing soccer. It's just unstructured time, turning over rocks, looking at things, and so forth. And so getting kids outdoors is incredibly important to me personally because I value the wildlife. And the first time I heard of the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, my boss had been at a workshop out of state and the founder had given a talk. So he comes home and he puts this binder on my desk, how to coordinate a Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. And man, I was angry. I was hot. I was like, oh, give me a break. Here I am, I'm working in an agency, there aren't that many females in it, you should shut up, do your job, and keep a sense of humor, and now you want to treat little ballerinas outside and call them outdoors women? Really? I was hot. I really was angry, and luckily, before I marched into his office and said, why did you put this on my desk, I read the first couple of pages of it. And in effect, it said that in this country, about half of marriages fail. And of single-parent families, 80% of them are led by women. And it doesn't take long to figure out that if those women aren't taking their kids outdoors, who's going to? So I looked at the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program as a chance to get the kids outdoors. And that's what scouting does, too. And so how am I going to get my kids outdoors? I got one kid who's a computer nerd and one kid who's a comedian. And are they going to go outdoors? Not without a lot of structure. You know, we need to get them outdoors. So that's why I volunteered with Scouts. And that's, in fact, there was one troop in town when my kid was graduating from Cubs from Webelos to Scouts, there was one troop in town that concentrated on computer work, and they lobbied legislators, and a terrific troop, really cool troop. But I didn't tell my son about them because I didn't want him to know that there was an option to be in Scouts and do computer work. I wanted him in a tent. So, and the one other program that was really cool that I got to work with was called Conservation Camp. And for 10 years, Fish and Game had a summer camp, a week-long camp where we taught kids how to hunt and fish. And the fishing, there was catch and release and catch and kill. And then they would cook that fish for dinner, and they would go on a small game hunt, and they would have grouse for dinner, and so forth. And it was a great program, but we never got to the point where the department could take it on and do it. We just had a dozen staff members doing it, other duties as assigned, and it just never became established within the department, and that's a big disappointment. But anyway, getting people outdoors to enjoy it safely. And I've always loved animals, and I've always loved dogs. And I thought I was going to have horses because I was crazy about horses as a kid. And I found out that in Alaska, I'm a little too lazy to do horses. That's a huge job. But I have friends who have horses, so I like being around them and so forth. But dogs worked into my life better, and then I learned about search and rescue. And again, it's people outdoors safely. And so that's just been, it's been a great experience to be able to work with my dog in a way that can benefit people. And it's a partnership type thing. It's not just a pet, and it's not just the dog doing exactly what I tell it to do. It's a dog and me doing different things to work together. I can't do what he does or she does, and she can't do what I do. So we're a team, we're partners, and it's just been fun. So anyway, so I guess it's getting people outdoors to appreciate what we have here and understand more about it and be safe doing it. So.
What makes a good search and rescue dog, and what was your most memorable experience as part of a search and rescue team?
Wow. Ideally, what you want is a dog that that likes to play, and whatever kind of play it wants, whether it's tug, whether it's retrieve, whether it's whatever. And then you have to figure out, if we're going to play, what does the dog want to win? What's going to be the reward when the dog wins? And some dogs want a tennis ball. Some dogs want a Frisbee. Some dogs want treats. We had one dog on our team one time, the only thing it ever wanted was pickled herring. And when you're training the dog, you have to, at the beginning, you take the reward with you when you're the lost person, and you had to walk out there with pickled herring. You had to be really loyal to do that one. But my first dog, the first dog is always incredible because you learn so much from the first dog. And I'm up to my 6th dog right now, and in some ways my most challenging dog because I got her from a rescue. I call her a Savunga Shepherd, and she was a rescue, well, her mother was a rescue from Savunga, but she came to Fairbanks pregnant, and my dog was one of the pups. And she's a lovely dog now. She's 3, but when I got her, she wasn't ideally socialized. So she was really, really timid and really afraid of things, but she's really grown back into it. But the most memorable thing, I think, well, it's hard to pin it. I mean, everyone dreams of being the one to find the child in the woods and put it back in mom and dad's arms, and that doesn't happen very often. And the reason is, you know, we're out there looking for clues, and the person is the biggest clue, but only probably one person's going to find that clue, and everybody finds others. One was, we had a lady on the Pinnell Mountain Trail, and she and her friend drove to the end of the trail, and she dropped her friend off, and they were both in their mid to late 60s, And then she drove to the other end, and then they both hiked, and they were going to meet in the middle and spend the night and then walk back out to the car. Great trip, everything's fine. And the first gal hikes to the middle of the trail, and she's not there. And she pitches her tent and spends the night. And then she comes out, and the car's there, and her friend isn't. And anyway, we were called out, and first we checked the trails, nothing on the trail. So then we're going to check the drainages off the ridge. And I'm heading towards my assignment, and one of the Fish and Wildlife troopers lands, and he said, hey, in that valley right there, I saw something that looked out of place. It's blue. And so I said, okay, cool. So we get helicoptered down to it, and it's a blue tarp, and it's over some gear. There's a backpack and a sleeping bag and some other things, and it kind of matched what we thought this lady was carrying with her. So first thing I did was I took the scent article I had, and I gave it to my dog, and I said, find it. And she jumped on the pack and stuck her head inside it. And I thought, okay, I think this is the lady's pack. So I put her trailing harness on, and I said, where'd she go? And she took off through the most god-awful pucker brush I have ever seen. And I got a guy behind me with a shotgun for bears, and he's about 6 feet behind me, and I can't see him. And my dog is 6 feet ahead of me on a line, and I can't see her, and we're going through this brush like this, and it's just incredible. And I finally said to the guy I'm with, I said, I don't see any way this woman could have come through here. I just don't see it. And just then we break out of the brush, and there's sand right next to the thing, and there's human footprints going through the sand. I was like, oh, cool, this is good, this is good. So I called the helicopter, and I tell base, and she's got a 2-day head start on us by this time, and we're not gonna outrun her. And I said, we are heading east on this creek. Tell somebody to get ahead of us, and we'll try to leapfrog and cut her off. And so anyway, they're bringing another team out to get ahead of us while we're still following the trail. And CAP was out there flying around, and Francis O'Connor was flying that plane. And yes, Civil Air Patrol, and they're looking for her also. And so they're looking around, and they see something green down in the creek. And so they call the helicopter, and they said, we'll go high, because they're fixed wing, and they're flying in circles. And they tell the helicopter, go down and see what that is. And the helicopter goes down, and it's just moss, no biggie. Well, while the plane is high, they look down and they see caribou. And the caribou, instead of looking up at the plane or just grazing, they're standing stock still, and they're looking uphill. And so the pilots kind of follow their gaze, and silhouetted on the top of the ridge is a person. And they're like, cool, and they turned, and they couldn't see her again. And she was invisible. And he's circling, and he said, I know she's here somewhere, and they can't see her anywhere. And finally, she took her hat off to wave at the plane, and she had white hair. And they saw her. And she had a black coat on and black pants and a black hat. And she was invisible. But she was directly in the line we were going. And so we were moving in the right direction, and we would have caught her eventually, but they saved us a lot of time. And so that was a really cool one, because did we find her? No. Did we bring her back? No. But did we contribute to the search? Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing where everybody's working on clues and working together. And would I have known what direction she went? I told her flat out she was wrong. No, nobody could go through this. The dog was right. And so scent is a physical clue that people leave behind, like candy wrappers or footprints or broken twigs or whatever. Scent is a physical clue that we can't see, and we can't smell, and we can't hear, so we can't detect it. And our job as handlers is to have the ability to interpret our dog's body language so that when the dog is in scent, we can detect where the clues are. So that's what we do. And it's a great opportunity to have wonderful experiences with an animal and to help the community.
Well, I could very easily go on for another couple hours here, but we are about at time. I wanted to give an opportunity if there's anybody in the audience who wants to ask a question or two.
I have a question, Cathie. roasts for them? Could you tell us a little bit about it?
This reeks of a setup.
Yeah, we did. The Fish and Game family, I was so lucky to be part of it. And people have a good sense of humor and so forth. And so we would have a party, and I usually ended up being the one collecting information on the person and kind of emceeing the party. And we would just, first I'd find out who has a funny story about this person. And I'd go door to door, and people would say, yeah, I could tell a funny story about that person, and so forth. And I'd get them all in order. And then I would talk to the person who was retiring, and I would take them through, okay, you came from here, you went to high school here, where'd you go to college, how'd you end up here, blah, blah. And then we would work people in to tell these funny stories about the person. And it was a great deal of fun. I mean, we laughed nonstop most of the time, but we also did silly things, like when Bud Burris retired. I'm talking to all the guys I work with, and I'm the only female working with them and everything. And I said, well, what does Bud like? What should we do for his retirement? What should we like? And as a joke, once upon a time, Bud had made a comment that he liked dancing girls with hairy armpits. And it was just a joke. But I said, that's what we're going to do. And they said, what? And I said, we're going to give them dancing girls with hairy armpits. And I went around and got the area biologist and the moose biologist and the toque area biologist, and I got about 6 guys. And I said, come up with a persona. You're going to be a dancing girl. And we had the deputy director of the department come up and be one of the dancing girls. And we had one of them being a caveman, and one being a cowgirl, and one being a harem girl. And these guys got into it. I mean, it was hysterical. And so that was Bud's retirement party. And it was just working with people that are willing to do something like that was such a treat. And we always had pretty funny retirement parties. And I can't even remember them all. There were so many of them, but it was, I'd had 2 guys tell me they weren't going to retire until after I did because they were afraid. But we had a good time.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. That's wonderful.